what I have for you is on full display the outcome of a Ron DeSantis or anyone who subscribes to that type of ideology governance, and what this ideology leads to, specifically in this case when it comes to the teaching of history accurately, which is what we should have in schools across the country. But Ron DeSantis and those under his leadership and those who subscribe to his ideology want it a very different way. And we have a very extreme example of that today. As USA Today reports, DeSantis' State Board of Education approves new rules for teaching African American history. And I'll, of course, give you specifics as to examples on that. In a historic move, Florida State Board of Education has approved new separate standards for how African American history must be taught to millions of students. The decision Wednesday comes after Governor Ron DeSantis and the Florida State Legislature have in recent years, as I'm sure you all know, passed a host of measures restricting how topics such as race and gender and sexuality can be taught in the state, including at the college level. And before I show you some examples of this, often as we start seeing steps in this direction, in the direction of changing the teaching of history to make it less accurate and to not properly inform students about history or subjects such as race, such as gender, such as sexual orientation. Whenever you initially call out the conservative Republican, this current brand of that ideology, as it begins to do things like this. Earlier on in DeSantis' career, for example, people will sometimes pretend that you're being hyperbolic. Oh no, he just wants to make sure that when we're discussing subjects like gender or race or whatever, it's just being taught at the appropriate age, and we still want it to be accurate. We still want to make sure students are well informed as they enter into the world. And then people will respond and say, no, it's walking in the direction of, and it will lead to eventually just taking out necessary conversations from schools or altering them in a way that is not beneficial. And that's exactly what's happening. That is exactly what's happening in Florida. So here is more reporting from Rolling Stone on this. Numerous clarifications have been added to the 6th through 8th grade African American history strand guidelines. The most egregious one requires teachers to describe the positive aspects of being a slave when discussing the various duties and trades performed by them. Let me reread that sentence. The most egregious one requires teachers to describe the positive aspects of being a slave when discussing the various duties and trades performed by them. It notes, instruction includes how slaves develop skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. And then it continues in another section on acts of violence perpetrated against and by African Americans. Things get even more convoluted. The guidelines describe how to teach about the growth and destruction of Black communities during the Reconstruction after the Civil War, the tragic 1920 Ocoee massacre, where dozens of Black Americans were killed when they went to vote, is noted as an example, but seemed to place the blame on Black people. And as I was reading about the Ocoee massacre portion of this alteration to how this is taught, it did structure in a way that was kind of a both sidesy conversation to the violence. When, if you're not familiar, this was Black Americans trying to vote and that prompting a massacre of Black Americans by white Americans. And so to tell that in a both sidesy way is incredibly dishonest and inaccurate, and not giving students, as schools are supposed to do, the information they need to be informed and to enter into the world as an informed adult eventually. And then I have for you here from CNN some reporting on this.
Please table this rule and revise it to make sure that my history.
And this is playing a clip, and then we'll get to the response from the CNN hosts, playing a clip of an individual speaking out against this.
Please table this rule and revise it to make sure that my history, our history, is being told factually and completely. And please do not, for the love of God, tell kids that slavery was beneficial, because I can guarantee you it most certainly was not. Thank you.
Education and civil rights advocates are slamming new Black history teaching standards in Florida. Under the new rules, middle school teachers must now include lessons, quote, how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. CNN's Athena Jones is here on this absolutely bonkers story. These changes are incredibly
I don't hear bonkers too much on CNN.
These changes are incredibly controversial, obviously, but they're also not correct.
Right, it's inaccurate, it's ahistorical. Critics are calling this a big step backwards and saying it's a disservice to Florida students because they're not going to learn the full truth and the full accurate truth of American history. And this is, of course, the latest development in ongoing debates over how to teach kids about Black history. You mentioned one of the most shocking examples for middle school students saying that slavery was beneficial. It's an odd thing to say about a group whose labor went uncompensated for generation upon generation. Here are some of the other examples we can put them up on the screen, of things that are involved in this curriculum. One of them is the teaching of the Ocoee Massacre. Teachers are required to mention acts of violence perpetrated by African Americans. Similar standards are applied to other massacres, the Tulsa Massacre, the Atlanta Race Riot, Rosewood Massacre. And I want to be clear here.
Okay, we'll stop it there, but very, of course, accurate analysis there from the CNN correspondent. And as was also noted, a lot of civil rights advocates and many others are speaking out against this. You have, quote, these new standards are a disservice to Florida students and are a big step backward for a state that has required teaching African American history since 1994. How can our students ever be equipped for the future if they don't have a full, honest picture of where we've come from? Exactly. And it once again highlights both, in this case, the damage that will be done to the knowledge of students, but also the correct warnings from mostly those on the left, those who rejected this ideology, coming from people like Ron DeSantis, that it is just trying to do this. That's what it's pushing towards. And all the talking points that surround it and convince more moderate Americans to think, oh, maybe this isn't so bad. They were just that. They were just dishonest talking points, not legitimate portrayals of the views of people like Ron DeSantis. And I don't have a list of names for you, but all the people who are involved in the actual mechanics of making this happen. And it is really horrifying what's going on there. And we need to continue calling it out and try to eventually, and it takes work, takes activism, but reverse these actions and then continue us on a course of progress instead of what's going on with the current Republican Party's efforts. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before all the clips are able to be uploaded to the YouTube channel, plus get the bonus show on the weekends, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. That's lukebeasleyshow.com/membership, and there's a link in the description.